Another quick demonstration for you. When we're doing these thumbnail sketches, which we'll do for most of our still life exercises, we want to come up with options for our composition. So you can see I did very rough and quick gestural sketches, kind of like that first homework assignment. Here's the one I did in the earlier video, and I added 3 more. I have 2 that are horizontally oriented or landscape oriented, and 2 that are oriented so that the higher dimension is the vertical dimension. We call this the kind of portrait orientation. So in looking for compositions that are more interesting, I tend to enjoy ones where I can see a little bit of space in the foreground, but where I don't have an enormous amount of empty space, and where my focal point isn't absolutely slapped in the middle. So at the moment, I'm kind of leaning a little bit more toward this composition, or maybe this one. Let's start with this one, just as an example. Let's say that is the one we decide to go with. How do I enlarge it to start working on a formal project? Well, you simply take a straight edge. You don't have to measure anything. There's no math. You're just using this for making a straight line. And in green, I'm making an X there. And if I really wanted to get fancy, I could, of course, connect up my halfway marks on the long side and on the short side as well. And now that green marker is giving me quadrants that I can reference in helping me to enlarge it. So I can take my 18 by 24 page. I'm just using newsprint. You'd be on good paper at this point. And you'd use a light pencil mark, like an H pencil. I'm just connecting up the opposite corners here on the paper and laying in that X. And if I want to get really fancy, I could go in and measure the exact halfway mark. Remember, this is a 24 wide. So if I mark top and bottom at 12 inches, that should line up with my center point. It does. It's 18 inches tall. So if I mark it at the 9, connect those. So I now have a guide on here that replicates the guide that I have on my sketch. So I can use this very, very quickly to just roughly place those objects. Based on my original drawing, we can tell where the objects roughly should be. Now, of course, you'd be doing this in pencil rather than marker. But you can start to see the composition coming together really quickly. Using a pretty simple method. So I've just taken this rough sketch and enlarged it to this surface. So once the sketch is enlarged, then you can go in and start doing more precision in your angle checking, your measuring, and so on, and then move on into whatever other requirements there are. If it's a cross-contour drawing, for instance, you might be laying in the contour lines along the planes of your objects to show how they move in space. It would be critical for me at this point to start thinking about the angles in the table. And notice that the angles, as they get closer to being directly in front of me, the angles change a little bit to be a little bit closer to horizontal, or rather vertical lines. As you're thinking about your use of these cross contours, you might evolve that into true cross-hatching. You could start putting more lines closer together to make one of the planes darker so that it more closely replicates what you see in the real world. So once your sketch has been enlarged, once you've done angle checking, measuring to make sure everything's in the right place, you can move on to other issues. Cross contour was the first one that we worked with, but you could certainly evolve that into hatching, cross hatching, other uses of value, and then more and more detail. So that's the basic setup of how to use a viewfinder, how to do angle checking, measuring, how to find a good composition, and then how to enlarge it to work in a more elaborate way.